Laurel and Hardy. Perhaps the most famous and possibly the funniest comedy double act of all time.
Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten me into.
Stan Laurel, a Lancashire lad from Ulverston, England. Oliver Hardy, a southern gentleman from Harlem, Georgia, USA.
This is my friend, Mr. Laurel, Admiral. My name is Hardy. Oliver Norval Hardy.
For 30 years, between 1921 and 1951, Laurel and Hardy featured in 107 films together. It was never Stan Laurel's or Oliver Hardy's plan to become part of a comedy team.
Why don't you do something to help me?
Before their chance meeting on screen in the 1921 film The Lucky Dog, both of them were working on their separate careers.
Stan Laurel was working in vaudeville theatre, but his urge to make films was about to evolve.
Oliver Hardy started in the film industry in 1914. And did you know he made over 200 films before he'd even met Stan Laurel?
So how did they become the legends we know and love? Who and what brought them together?
Turn on the radio and let's have some music.
Stan Laurel was born Arthur Stanley Jefferson on the 16th of June 1890 at 3 Foundry Cottages, which was later changed to Argyle Street in Ulverston, England. His mother, Margaret, or Madge, was an actress. His father, Arthur, was an actor, playwright, producer and manager of theatres in the north east of England and in Scotland.
Arthur was already managing theatres in the northeast of England at the time of Stan's birth. As well as his home in Ulverston, he was also renting theatrical lodgings in 15 High Tenter Street in Bishop Auckland.
Arthur Jr., or Stan as he was known, was the second oldest of 5 children. There was Gordon, Stan, Beatrice, Sydney and Teddy. Sydney unfortunately only survived for a couple of months.
Oliver Hardy was born Norval Hardy on the 18th of January 1892 in South Hick Street, Harlem, Georgia, USA. His father, Oliver, worked as a line foreman for the Georgia Southern Railroad. His mother, Emily, was a former school teacher.
Emily's marriage to Oliver Hardy was actually her second marriage. She had been previously married to Thomas Samuel Tant, with whom she had 5 children. Tom Jr., Mary, Emily, Sam and Henry. But Mr. Tant Sr. died in February 1887, aged just 55, which left Emily with 5 young children, and she herself was just 26 years old. Then it was 3 years after Thomas's death that she married Oliver Hardy on the 12th of March 1890.
Norval's dad quit his job on the railroad. His parents then went on to be managers of the Turner Butler Hotel, Madison, Georgia.
On the 22nd of November 1892, when Norval was just 10 months old, his father passed away, leaving his mother, Emmy, a widow for the second time.
So soon after Oliver Hardy Sr.'s death, Emily was very cruelly fired from the Turner Butler Hotel. However, shortly afterwards, she established her own hotel. It was known as the Hardy House, near Madison train depot, which she ran for several years.
Back in England, Stan was now living at 8 Dockery Square, North Shields, a family home which stood pretty much here. He would often play on the grassy square, Dockery Square, outside the front of the house, which even today is very much as it was.
His grandparents were still living in Ulverston in 3 Argyle Street, but Stan used to love visiting his grandparents. He'd spend time playing in the becks, shopping in the local shops, and used to enjoy Beer's treacle toffee. It was his favourite treat.
Inspired by his father at the age of 7, Stan was already taking a keen interest in the theatre. At the family home in 8 Dockeray Square, Stan would often put on plays in the backyard with brother Gordon and sister Beatrice Olga. Soon after, he landed a part in his father's production playing a newsboy in Lights of London. His family and friends were already starting to see Stan's sense of humour shining through. At the age of 12, they moved to Ayton House. Stan convinced his father to convert the attic into a small theatre, and a little 30-seater was created.
Stan formed the Stanley Jefferson Amateur Dramatic Society, and he used to put on little plays with his friends. He'd be the actors, the director, he'd be the producer.
Stan was heavily distracted by his passion for the theatre, so much so it was beginning to affect his academic ability.
His father wasn't amused, so decided to send him to King James I Grammar School in Bishop Auckland in order to improve his education.
Stan probably wasn't the best student at school, but his comic timing was always there, even at an early age. He used to get invited into the teachers' rooms to put on little skits and plays for the teachers.
It is March the 8th, 1902, and you are at King James I Grammar School in Bishop Auckland.
He wasn't sure of the quality of them, but he said the teachers used to get a kick out of them.
Is that how I talk? It certainly is. That is excellent, Jefferson. Excellent!
One of his impressions of the German master didn't go down too well, and I think he got into a little bit of trouble over that one.
You're in trouble for mimicking and mocking the good names of the finest teachers here! How dare you mock the teachers who offer you the finest quality of teaching?
So when Stan's parents found out about the plays that he was putting on at school for the teachers, they began to really help him with his burgeoning comedy career.
Arthur Jefferson continued his work as a theatre manager. In 1901, he added the Metropole Theatre in Glasgow to his small chain and commuted regularly between Bishop Auckland and North Shields.
Around 1903, the Hardy family moved to and ran the Milledgeville Hotel, which was later renamed the Baldwin Hotel.
Norville helped his mum at the hotel as much as he could. One of his duties, which he really disliked, was the job as a sandwich man, where he had to walk the streets of Milledgeville advertising the hotel's food specials. Around this time, Norville was introduced to baseball. He soon became an umpire for his local team. But due to his size though, he did suffer a certain amount of bullying.
Despite his work at the hotel and his baseball skills, Norville's main interest was singing.
The family loved music and singing, and it was soon discovered that Oliver had a beautiful soprano voice.
Now his mother encouraged his passions. She saved every single penny she had, and he himself saved all his tips so he could take the trips to Atlanta to watch operettas and musicals.
One such show was A Bohemian Girl, which would become a film later in his career with Stan Laurel.
He began entertaining family and friends at the Baldwin Hotel, and he had a repertoire of 2 songs, Silver Thread Among the Gold and When You and I Were Young, Maggie.
At the age of 12, Norville's mother married for a 3rd time to Charles Francis Jackson on the 2nd of February 1904.
Shortly afterwards, Norville was moved to Young Harris Academy School in the hills of northern Georgia. His mother made the decision to send him there to get him away from the hotel, as it had become too much of a distraction. She claimed he was easily influenced by travelling salesmen who encouraged card games and cigar smoking.
Despite there being a no smoking attitude at the Young Harris Academy, pipe smoking was allowed, and Norville became a member of the school's Pipe Smokers Club.
At a recently opened tattoo parlour, Oliver had a maple leaf tattooed on his right inner forearm. If you look closely, you can see this in Great Guns, One Good Turn and Dirty Work.
You attend to your way, and I'll attend to mine.
In 1905, now a teenager, Norville was still chasing his singing ambition. He found work at Milledgeville Opera House, where he sang popular vaudeville hits.
He was often called in as a substitute if an act was sick or couldn't make it. And he always finished his turn with a rendition of You Are the Ideal of My Dreams, which years later featured in a Laurel and Hardy movie, Bohunks.
The Jefferson family moved from Ayton House in North Shields to the small historic town of Rutherglen, 3 miles from Glasgow, in the summer of 1905.
The move to Scotland in 1905 was to escape the financial pressures which Arthur was under from his theatre enterprises. It's also said that his wife Margaret's ill health had been a consideration. Arthur was to remain as Metropole manager for 22 years, some of those years with his eldest son Gordon. However, for 15 of those 22 years, he was an absentee manager. Young Stan hadn't long turned 15 years old when his family moved to this rather grand house called Craigily. It's in Rutherglen at 57 Buchanan Drive. It was rented in the name of Stan's mother, Margaret Jefferson, which was unusual at that time, and that may have been because of Arthur's financial difficulties in England. This is Stonelaw High School, which Stan attended. It's in Melrose Avenue in Rutherglen. By 1905 it had been extended so that senior pupils didn't have to travel to Glasgow to complete their education. Stan in later life admitted that school had not been important to him and he'd often played truant. By early 1907 Stan's schooling had ended and he became gallery ticket collector at his father's Metropole Theatre in Glasgow. Stan said that it was while standing on that stage one morning that he made up his mind to pursue a stage career.
Stan's ambition took him to another theatre in Glasgow, the Britannia Theatre of Varieties, also known as the Panopticon.
The extrovert showman Albert Ernest Pickard, at his nearby theatre in Chongate, was the man to give Stan his chance on stage at a Friday amateur slot.
No one knows exactly when Stan appeared at the Panopticon. Early 1907 must be a strong possibility because of what happened next to Stan's dream of a stage career.
Friday evenings at the Panopticon were go-as-you-please shows which gave amateur acts a chance on stage. Stan met with Pickard and got himself a break. The performance probably took place in the annex next door, which had a small stage at one end and a 3-piece ladies band in attendance, rather than on the main stage, which had seating for 500 patrons and a resident review company appearing nightly. Stan said that he'd taken his father's top hat, frock coat and check trousers, which he cut down for this act, without his father's knowledge. Stan described his act as bloody awful, but by chance his father saw him perform and saw Stan's potential.
It wasn't long after that Arthur Jefferson helped Stan secure a contract with juvenile pantomime company Levy and Cardwell. He got the part of a gollywog called Ebenezer in A Tour of Sleeping Beauty. It was soon after signing that contract that Stan left Scotland.
Goodbye!
The shows Novel watched in Atlanta really inspired him. But one of them, he watched his hero, Enrico Caruso, which he later referred to as the greatest musical event of his entire life, and was what inspired him to take his singing career further.
Still unhappy at boarding school, Norval ran away again to Atlanta in hopes to chase his dream of becoming a singer. This was the 17th of April 1906, the day a great riot broke out in the city. He soon returned home in the pouring rain, however, but refused to go back to boarding school.
He pleaded with his mother to let him study music. Eventually, she agreed. She wanted her son to be happy. Norval returned to Atlanta once more and studied hard at the Atlanta Conservatory of Music. His music tutor was Professor Adolph Dahm Patterson.
At a nearby movie house, Norval got a job singing to illustrated slides, several times a day for $3.50 a week. This led him to cutting a lot of his music classes.
His mother Emmy checked at the music college on his progress and was told Norval had no ambition, and this was far from the truth. His ambition was to sing to live audiences regaling popular songs.
Emmy had other ideas though. She took him out of music college, then sent him to the Georgia Military College. Norval struggled with their strict discipline measures and ran away several times to his home at the Baldwin Hotel, which was luckily just across the road.
He settled down and made friends and became a popular part of the football team. However, he did receive a certain amount of abuse regarding his weight.
Norval's elder sister Mary said he comfort ate because he missed the father he never really met. Norval appeared to eat more if he was going through mental trauma.
In the summer of 1906, a big family trauma occurred. During a fishing trip with friends and his older brother Sam, there was a tragedy.
Sam had dived into the Oconee River in Georgia. He hit a shallow spot and suffered head and neck injuries. Now Norval and his friend managed to rescue him, but Sam was left paralysed and developed pneumonia. Sadly, he died just 2 days later.
Back at military school, Norval tried to please his mother with his studying. He had a great sense of humour and a talent for making people laugh, including the headmaster, who encouraged it because he knew it helped Norval psychologically.
Now, in 1907, he joined with some undergraduates on a tour where they played Who Killed Cock Robin. And he always ended the act with a rendition of the title song in the chorus. He also, at that time, used to entertain them all by acting out silly scenarios, pantomime style. One of them had him climbing a tree imitating a bear.
Despite his enjoyment of silly little shows like this, he still wasn't keen on college. He had other things in mind.
On the 16th of July 1908, Stan placed an advert in the theatrical newspaper The Stage, seeking employment. By August, Stan had joined the cast of his father's sketch, Home from the Honeymoon, which was nearing the end of a successful tour of English theatres.
Home from the Honeymoon was a 20-minute sketch written by Stan's dad. In it, two burglars break into a house owned by Colonel Pepper and then pretend to be the butler and the maid and Colonel Pepper. You might recognise the synopsis of that film. He went on to use it twice in Duck Soup and Another Fine Mess.
In the early summer of 1907, Stan's parents had downsized to a tenement flat at 17 Craigmillar Road in the Battlefield area of Glasgow, and they were soon joined by their eldest son Gordon and his family, who were in rented accommodation just down the corner in Brisbane Street.
It was here at 17 Craigmillar Road that Stan's 48-year-old mother, Madge Jefferson, died after a long illness on the 1st of December 1908.
Madge was buried 2 days later in Cathcart Cemetery, less than 2 miles from Craigmillar Road. Madge was laid to rest in an unmarked grave.
November 1908 saw the start of the pantomime season, with Stan once again employed by Levy and Cardwell. This time in the pantomime, The House That Jack Built.
His mother's death and his father's bankruptcy must have weighed heavily on his young mind during this time, as he was alone many miles from Glasgow.
Stan completed the House That Jack Built tour in April 1909.
According to biographer John McCabe, Stan went home to rest. The sports paper The Scottish Referee, in its Stageland section, dated the 28th of May 1909, had Stan appearing at his father's Metropole Theatre in a production of The Streets of Glasgow. The production ended on the 29th of May.
At the Grand Theatre in Cowcaddens in Glasgow, the Fred Carnot Company had a Christmas pantomime of Mother Goose in production. Stan asked to meet Fred Carnot and was soon speaking to him regarding his budding comedy career. Carnot agreed to give him a trial run with his troupe based in England. It was soon after joining Carnot that Stan landed himself a part in the comedy sketch Mumming Birds.
Now aged 18, Norval Hardy landed himself a job at the Palace Theatre, which was the first movie house in Milledgeville. Its name later became the Electric Theatre.
His main job was as the projectionist, electrician if you like, but he did everything. He swept floors, he sold candy, even acted as manager when the boss was absent. He had a very, very outgoing nature. He was fun to be around, he made people laugh, and this made him very, very popular with cinema goers. And they loved him so much. You all come back now, you hear?
Norval took great interest in the movies playing at the Palace Theatre, emphasising with the hero, heroine and villain. He had his thoughts regarding what he'd seen, particularly with Max Linder films. After studying the films, Norval felt he could be as good or maybe as bad as some of those he'd seen watching. Either way, he couldn't be any worse. He never got bored of watching the films. He studied them really well. It was a real education for him, especially with what he thought worked and what didn't. Although at this point, his main ambition was still with music, he wanted to have a go at movies.
By 1910, Stan was now touring the British music halls with the Fred Carno Company in a selection of sketches: Mumming Birds, The Casuals, Skating and Jimmy the Fearless.
For Jimmy the Fearless, Carno cast Chaplin in the main role, but Chaplin's heart wasn't really in it. He didn't like the character, and during rehearsals this became evident to Fred Carno as well, and he decided the part wasn't for Chaplin, and Chaplin was quite fine about that. So Stan performed the role in a number of nights, and Chaplin was sitting in the audience watching him, and he liked what he saw. Stan basically played the role perfectly and got a lot of laughs, and Chaplin didn't like that. So he approached Carno and said he wanted to get back into the role. And Carno, of course, gave it to his #1 star. So Stan was dropped because he didn't have a say in the matter. He was just part of the company. Chaplin was the main guy. And Stan went back into the chorus. And Chaplin continued to play that character exactly the way Stan played it.
The Carno British tour ended on the 12th of September 1910. Just over a week later, on the 22nd of September, the Fred Carno Company boarded the SS Cairnrona and embarked on a tour of the United States.
They arrived on the 2nd of October with very little time to prepare. The show was going to start the next night. For the American audiences, The Mumming Birds was renamed A Night at an English Music Hall.
They were also performing another sketch called The Wow Wows.
Chaplin once again got obviously the lead role in the Wow Wows, but the reviews were not good, and especially after the first night, the newspapers and the critics basically slated it. Stan's part of the Dude got a lot of recognition, with reviewers saying that they thought he was very, very funny, and naturally Stan was very, very pleased with that. The American tour ran until July 1911. And Stan enjoyed the experience, and he actually loved it an awful lot, but he got paid very, very little, and his protestations at his paycheck went on deaf ears, and he was basically fobbed off. So himself and another member of the company, Arthur Dando, decided they'd had enough, and they returned to England.
Stan and Arthur Dando worked together in a double act named the Bartow Brothers, playing an act called The Rummans from Rome. This was a short-lived partnership which lasted for a couple of weeks, after which they split due to differences of opinion.
Stan went on to work for the Charles Baldwin Company, and they did a few shows in the north of England with a sketch called Waxworks, and Stan played a character called Lionheart.
During the production of Waxworks, Stan got friendly with Ted Leo. The pair of them reformed the Bartow Brothers act and resumed the sketch The Rummans from Rome. This toured for a short time, but it wasn't long before this partnership ended and Stan became out of work for a while.
Stan found himself in London in 1912, absolutely broke after Rummans from Rome had ended. He was persuaded by his brother Gordon to give up the stage and join him in theatre management. Reluctantly, that's what he did. A chance meeting, though, with Alf Reeves, Carno's manager, changed his mind, because Reeves told him about a forthcoming tour again to the States, and he persuaded Stan to join them.
After 3 years working at the Palace Theatre in Milledgeville, Norval was chatting to a friend who told him about the growing film industry over in Jacksonville, Florida.
Before Hollywood, this was the thriving industry where films were made, and Jacksonville was the spot to go to. Plenty of land, so there's plenty of space. The friend must have really encouraged him, because he decided to quit his job and he headed over to try his own luck in movies in Jacksonville.
He soon found a job working locally in cabaret at the Orpheum Theatre in town. Playing in the pit orchestra at the Orpheum was a girl he'd met briefly when working at the Milledgeville Opera House. Her name was Madeline Soloshin. She was a middle-class Jewish girl from a song publishing family and was a top vaudeville pianist.
Norville felt he was out of Madeline's league. She was earning $300 a week, whilst he was only earning $40. Despite her being 10 years older, which was unheard of back then, they pursued a relationship. She soon got him a job on the vaudeville act which she starred in, which is great for him. It gave him a chance to show his singing talent.
The pair of them eloped and were soon married on the 7th of November 1913. Norville was now 21. As newlyweds, they returned to Jacksonville, Florida.
Norville frequented the Lubin film studios to watch how they operated. Their exterior stage was open to the public. He enjoyed seeing how the Lubin company worked because they seemed to have so much fun at work. The Florida sunshine meant a lot of outdoor filming took place. Norville found great delight in watching the comedy filmmakers at work. He felt a kinship there and even volunteered to be a water boy just to get close to the actors.
He hadn't been there that long and he was spotted by one of the directors who noticed this large, heavy-set guy carrying buckets of water. And it just so happened he was actually looking to cast a large, fat boy, if you like, for his next movie. So Ollie got lucky.
Norville got the role as Reggie in the film Outwitting Dad. He was billed as O.N. Hardy, taking his father's name for the first time.
This wasn't to be the only name that he acquired in 1914.
Close to the Lubin Film Company was a little barber's shop, and that they all used to go there to have their hair cut and a shave.
There's an Italian barber that took a fancy to Oliver Hardy, and he used to rub powder on his cheeks and say, "Nicer baby, nicer baby."
Which of course the rest of the guys thought was hilarious.
So they teased him about it and called him Baby from then on, and then that got shortened to Babe, and that remained his nickname for the rest of his life.
He remained as Norville to his family because his mother Emmy wasn't keen on the name Babe, nor was she too happy about him using his father's name. However, she had herself to blame for that, as she had told him about his father's virtues as a southern gentleman, which impressed him so much. That was the reason he used it. It was part of his sentimental nature.
The name Babe soon stuck. He used it from then on in his following films.
Lubin kept Oliver Hardy busy playing a variety of roles, but due to his size, mainly villains or heavies. He rose from extra billing to star billing in just 4 months, starring in over 40 films in 1914 alone. He was a great actor. Not only could he portray menace, but could bring laughter, particularly in the way he used his body in full function. He was a natural comedy actor, hugely inspired from his study of films at the Palace Theatre.
On arriving back in America with the Fred Carno Company, Stan found himself sharing a room with Charlie Chaplin. On this tour, Stan began as Chaplin's understudy.
The tour commenced in October 1912, performing mainly the Wow-Wows, but they did go on to do a night in an English music hall and a night in London. So after 13 months on tour in the US, in November 1913, Chaplin was intrigued, I suppose is the word, by the emerging film industry. And one night Max Sennett was sitting in the audience and he saw Chaplin on stage and liked what he saw. So when Sennett got back to Hollywood, he had his people wire Alf Reeves looking for a Mr. Chaffin or something. And Chaplin obviously answered it, and he was offered $150 a week, huge money, to come and work at the Sennett Studios. Now Chaplin bargained. He got $150 a week for the first 3 months and then $175 after that. And that was it. He left the Carno Company, went over to Hollywood and started working for the Max Sennett Company at Keystone.
With Chaplin now gone, Stan stepped into the shoes of the lead role. The tour continued without Chaplin and ended in May 1914. It was at this point the Carno Company disbanded.
Stan decided to stay in America. Other members of the company also stayed there. Stan himself joined forces with Edgar Hurley and his wife Ethel. And they formed a trio called the Three Comiques, and they did a sketch called The Nutty Burglars. The three of them eventually changed their name to the Keystone Trio, and they performed a Chaplin imitation act. Now, many others had imitated the same act, but the Keystone Trio were the very first to do it.
Under management by Claude W. Bostock, the Keystone Trio landed a tour playing shows in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania and several other American towns and cities from January to June 1915.
After an argument between Stan and Edgar Hurley over who would play the Chaplin character, the trio split up and Stan was left to find two replacements. He soon found two replacements in Baldwin and Alice Cook, and they formed the Jefferson Trio and performed a sketch called The Crazy Cracksman.
The Stan Jefferson Trio toured until the end of March 1916.
A few weeks later, Stan was involved with Martini and Maximilian. They were a magicians act who used to parody the top magicians of the time. Stan's role was to get involved and expose how the tricks were done.
Stan toured with them throughout the rest of 1916.
When the filming season at Lubin ended in 1914, Norval was persuaded by a fellow actor, Ray McKee, to come to New York and try to find work over there. So the two of them boarded a steamer and headed off.
Babe didn't have the best of experiences. He was ill for most of the journey there. They stayed in an inexpensive hotel, The Mills, near the corner of 35th Avenue and 7th. Due to how busy and noisy it was in New York, Babe felt really uncomfortable and returned to Jacksonville, Florida.
Filming at Lubin resumed in spring 1915. By August the same year, the company went into partnership with Vitagraph.
A guy Norval knew called Bert Tracy had persuaded him to give New York another try. So that's exactly what he did. He headed off again, this time hoped to find work in vaudeville.
Success as a singer was not to be. However, he did find work in films, working for various companies: Casino, Novelty, Starlight, Gaumont, Edison and Pathé. He later featured in the Wharton Brothers series. This was between September and October 1915. Babe later returned to Jacksonville, where he found cabaret work.
By November 1915, the Lubin Studios hit financial struggles and became bankrupt.
The studios were bought by Vim Comedy Company by two aggressive owners, Mark Dintenfras and Louis Burstein. They were already an established company with their headquarters in New York. It was Burstein who took charge of the Jacksonville studios.
Babe was still singing in cabaret. One evening, Burstein and his wife heard his singing talents and were impressed by it. They also enjoyed the way he gracefully moved about the stage. He was soon offered a job at Vim.
This suited Babe because Vim worked on their films during the day, and this meant he could still work evenings with Madeline at the Burbridge Hotel.
The work made for a nice salary too. However, he was often taken advantage of because of his kind and generous, soft nature. He helped people financially by loaning them money, to which they would conveniently forget to repay him back. Babe was too soft-hearted to remind them to repay him.
Hardy's first film at Vim was The Midnight Prowlers, released in November 1915. It was the first of the Pokes and Jabs series, working alongside Bobby Burns, Walter Stull and Billy Rouge. That was followed by the Plump and Runt series, where Babe was teamed up with Billy Rouge, where they made over 31 reelers together.
By the end of 1916, Babe had been partnered up with Irish-born Kate Price. She had just left Vitagraph and they made a number of films together.
During his time off stage from Martini and Maximilian, Stan had become very good friends with the Australian dancer-actress May Dalberg.
At the beginning of 1917, they formed an act called Stan and May Laurel. May had sometimes used the name Laurel on stage. They were not only partners on stage, but off stage too, living together as common law man and wife. It was at this time that Stan adopted the name Laurel on stage, although it wasn't the last time he used Jefferson. Stan always said that the name Laurel came from he and May being in a theatre. They were down on the luck, and May picked up a history book from the side. She turned to a page, and there was a Roman general in his laurel wreath. She turned to Stan and said, "Stan, look to your laurels." And Stan said, "I like it."
They had been working on a script called Raffles the Dentist.
In Raffles the Dentist, Stan played a burglar, complete with a theatrical comedy red nose. This sketch was very similar to his early one, The Nutty Burglars.
The tour of Raffles the Dentist took Stan and May to the Hippodrome Theatre in LA, and Stan was spotted by film director Alf Goulding, who recognised Stan's film potential.
Stan met with Isidore Bernstein of Bernstein Productions, where he signed to make a series of comedies entitled Stanley Comedies. Production of his debut film, Nuts in May, began in June 1917. May Dalberg also featured alongside him.
Early 1917, the Vim Company ran into financial troubles. The Florida Times Union claimed there was a huge shortage of money, which led to counterclaims that the auditors were actually working the books there.
Lawsuits between Burstein and Dintenfass occurred. Vim changed its name to the Amber Star Film Corporation and was ran by Dintenfass. Burstein went on to form the King B Film Corporation. He persuaded Babe and a few other Vim players to join him to produce a series of 2 reelers supporting Billy West. Babe's role in these was to play a heavy.
Filming started in Jacksonville, Florida, but then moved to the Horsley Studios in Bayonne, New Jersey, and Babe made 7 films there. King B made another movie in October 1917, but this time the destination was Hollywood, California.
After filming Nuts in May, the plan to make more Stanley comedies ended quite abruptly. Bernstein withdrew his agreement to continue the series.
Luckily for Stan, he still had work in vaudeville touring Raffles the Dentist with May. And at this time, and by October of 1917, he found his way back into movies at Universal, working for Nestor and LKO.
He made just 4 films at Universal, and then he was laid off by the company due to financial reasons.
The release of the films were delayed. The first one to be released was Hickory Hiram in April 1918. Stan wasn't having much luck with the film industry, so he continued his life back on the road with May Dalberg.
At another studio, the Rolling Film Company, one of the producers there, a chap called Hal Roach, had just signed a contract with Pathé to produce a series of comedies featuring Arnold Novello as Toto the Clown. But for some unknown reason, Novello decided not to continue with that series.
Hal Roach was left without a leading actor for the series of 5 pictures. However, director Alf Goulding had seen Stan's vaudeville act, and he made a recommendation to Roach that he should probably use Stan. So based on Goulding's recommendation, Hal Roach sent a message to Stan and he offered him a contract.
Stan impressed the producers and was employed to make 5 films, being billed for the first time as Stan Laurel.
Babe and the rest of the crew arrived in Hollywood on the 24th of October 1917. Filming began on The Slave at the beginning of November. Babe continued to work on another 10 films, appearing alongside a regular cast including Billy West, Leatrice Joy, Ethel Burton, Leo White and Joe Bordeaux. Soon after completing filming on Playmates in May 1918, the King B production company closed down.
Babe Hardy then went on to make comedies with the Bullseye Film Corporation, Reelcraft Pictures and then onto the LKO Studios, which Stan Laurel had worked at the year before.
Babe made 9 films at LKO before his time there was cut short due to a flu epidemic. By the autumn of 1918, the LA Health Department had put restrictions on the number of people who could work in one area. Masks had to be worn. Sounds familiar. The epidemic became so bad that the National Association of Motion Pictures, they agreed a general shutdown, and movie theatres around the country ceased. So the work basically dried up.
RKO closed its studio for 4 weeks. During that time, Babe found himself a job working with director Larry Seaman at Vitagraph Pictures as a support actor for former Fred Karno company member Jimmy Aubrey.
After the completion of the 5 films with Hal Roach, Stan had fulfilled his contractual obligation, so was shown the door. However, before returning to vaudeville again, Stan got to work in 3 films with Larry Seaman: Huns and Hyphens, Bears and Bad Men, and Frauds and Frenzies.
Apparently this run of just 3 pictures with Larry Seaman ended for Stan due to the flu epidemic. Stan wasn't a contract player but was in need of work. It was at this point he returned to vaudeville, performing a sketch called No Mother to Guide Her with May.
Jimmy Aubrey always wanted to be the centre of attention in every shot. When filming, Oliver Hardy did his best to work as closely to Aubrey as he could. And this paid off for Babe, as he soon became recognised as a comic heavy.
Aubrey wasn't impressed at Babe stealing the limelight. He didn't want to work with clever comics, and so he requested that Babe look elsewhere for work.
The then new director, Jess Robbins, insisted that Babe stayed where he was, however.
Jess Robbins was a writer and director. He joined Vitagraph in early 1920. His first film there was Fists and Fodder, with Jimmy Aubrey and Oliver Hardy. The last film Babe worked on with Jimmy Aubrey was The Tourist. Filming ended in January 1921. Babe was then booted from the company.
Stan had been working endlessly in vaudeville with his partner May. All the hard work performing shows every night were beginning to tire him out, so he was inspired to do more with pictures.
Bronco Billy Anderson was a writer, producer and director. In 1907 he established the S&A Film Company with George K. Spohr. Together they produced a long series of Western films.
In 1915, S&A signed Chaplin away from Mack Sennett at Keystone. At that time, Jess Robbins was the general manager of the production company.
By 1919, Anderson's association with S&A ended. He moved to Hollywood to set up his own company, Amalgamated Producing Company, where he produced more westerns.
By mid-1920, Bronco Billy Anderson was looking towards adding other production units to his company.
During Stan Laurel's vaudeville tour, Anderson was in the audience. He was very impressed by Stan's comic performance.
With a new comedy production unit in mind, Anderson phoned Stan, offering him a film deal. The plan was to make a series of 26 pictures, and being tired of life on the road by now, Stan accepted the offer. Billy Anderson met with his old friend and colleague Jess Robbins, where he asked him to direct his next picture, a pilot for his upcoming series.
Robbins accepted the offer, then recruited some of the old Jimmy Aubrey unit to work with him. One such person was Babe Hardy, who was brought in as a support actor to Stan Laurel. Babe once again was cast as a heavy, this time a robber.
Production on the film began in January 1921. It was to be called The Lucky Dog. Other members of the cast were Florence Gilbert, Jack Lloyd and Stan's brother Ted Jefferson as the butler.
Although at this point it was never a plan to pair the comic actors together, you can sense the chemistry between them. Even from their first film together, you can see some early signs of their future characteristics.
There's that scene in the film that shows their great knack for anticipating each other's actions and reactions.
The Lucky Dog was filmed at various locations in LA and at the Selig Studios. Production finished at the end of January 1921. The film wasn't released until December 1921 by Real Craft Pictures. It was to be another 5 years until Laurel and Hardy worked together again. So what happened after the making of The Lucky Dog?
Stan went back on the road. After years of tiring nights in theatre, he completed his vaudeville tour on the 26th of December 1921.
Bronco Billy Anderson invested the money he made from The Lucky Dog by trying again with the Stan Laurel comedy series.
By May 1921, Stan was working at the Universal lot. Bronco Billy Anderson was doing his best to promote the series. During an interview, he would later say, "In Stan Laurel, I believe I have found a comedian who will be as popular as Charlie Chaplin."
In 1923, Stan was signed by Hal Roach, who in 1920 had taken over the ownership of the old Rollin Film Company. He'd renamed it to the Hal Roach Studios, and working for Roach, Stan soon became a highly praised film comedian. As well as signing to make a series of one-reelers, not only was he a comedy actor, but he also worked as a writer and a director.
Oliver Hardy continued working with Larry Semin at Vitagraph Pictures.
As well as their professional relationship, they became good friends socially. It was Larry Semin who introduced Hardy to a game that would become Hardy's lifelong passion, golf. They even produced a film called Golf in 1922. Oliver Hardy soon reached a professional skill as a golfer and became the best known player in the film industry, playing alongside the likes of Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. Hardy worked with Larry Semin until the end of 1924. He then worked for Billy West at Arrow Pictures, where he made 7 films.
By January 1925, Oliver Hardy had been signed to Hal Roach Studios. They began making films, with the first being Wild Papa. He had a great ambition to make a big name for himself in the all-star comedies.
Hardy worked with many names who would later become better known. Richard Currier, James Parrott, Charlie Chase, Noah Young and James Finlayson, to name a few.
On the films Yes Yes Nanette and Wandering Papas, Hardy found himself again working with Stan Laurel. However, not on screen together. Stan was a director on both of these pictures.
Just before filming began on the film Get 'Em Young, Oliver Hardy suffered an accident at home.
On the Friday evening before filming began on the following Monday, Oliver Hardy was at home cooking himself a leg of lamb, and as he was getting it out of the oven, he dropped it, spilling hot fat all over his arm, and he suffered serious burns, so this meant he couldn't start filming on the Monday, and because of it being short notice over the weekend, they were struggling to find another actor to replace him. So Hal Roach suggested that Stan stepped in and did it.
Although Stan at this point was happy writing and directing, he reluctantly stepped in to cover the role.
Now being back in front of the camera, Stan continued on more pictures. By the end of 1925, he was working on a film called 45 Minutes from Hollywood.
Cast as a detective was Oliver Hardy. At last, the two of them appeared in front of the camera in the same film, but amazingly, they had no scenes together.
However, in the next picture together, they did appear on screen in the same scene several times. This was on a film based on a sketch written by Stan's father, Home from the Honeymoon, and the film was called Duck Soup.
Laurel and Hardy still focused on their own films. They were cast together several more times.
During those following films, we began to see more of those Laurel and Hardy characteristics emerging.
It was finally in 1927 that Hal Roach realised their potential as a comedy duo.
Neither Stan nor Babe really wanted to be teamed. Eventually, they reluctantly agreed to the idea and production on Laurel and Hardy films began.
We first see a glimpse of their now more familiar Laurel and Hardy characters in Do Detectives Think? It was from here on that the Laurel and Hardy partnership evolved and flourished into what has become a true comedy legacy.
No one could have envisaged that Stan Laurel from England and Oliver Hardy from America would go on to become two giants of entertainment.
Two men with very different journeys met in Hollywood and went on to make millions of people laugh for over 100 years.
If Stan's father had been a better businessman, the Jeffersons would not have moved to Scotland, and Stan's career might have taken a different path.